Yes guys, welcome back to another Fantasy Football Fix video. My name is FPL Nacho, and in this video we're going to be discussing the top transfers ahead of game week 9. Now, I know a lot of you out there have currently activated your wildcards or you're using your free transfers to bring in players. So this video is going to be a little bit essential for you guys to know exactly which players that you should be bringing in. So if you are new around here, make sure you are subscribing to the channel. And if you do enjoy the content, make sure you do drop a like. But without further ado, guys, let's take a look at the first player to consider ahead of game week 9. Okay guys, so the first player we're going to be looking at is Leicester's James Maddison, a very popular pick right now in the FPL community for a lot of reasons right now. Currently priced at 7.9 million, so one of those players that kicked off the season at 8 million in that bracket, and I would argue one of the better performing players in that price bracket. 6 games played and 3 goals scored. And considering the fixtures that Leicester have played so far this season, teams included Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United, Brighton, while they had Graham Potter, and Spurs, I would argue that is a decent return for somebody of Maddison's price range. And in particular, with the form that Leicester are in right now, Maddison is pretty much carrying that Leicester team as it is, even though they've had a horrific start to the season. So if Leicester can turn the curve a little bit, it's just going to enhance Maddison as an even better FPL option. Now, delving into the underlying stats a little bit, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily the best reading for Maddison as an FPL option. Looking at his expected goals at 1.3, he's actually the 19th best for midfielders at 8 million or below. So we're not necessarily looking at a player right now that is in the top 10 for underlying stats in expected goals. There are better players out there than him if we're considering that metric in isolation. But nonetheless, as I said, still a talismanic figure in this Leicester team. And importantly, when we are looking at the fixtures coming up over the next 4, Leicester are actually second best for fixtures between game weeks 9 and game weeks 12, with fantastic home fixtures against Nottingham Forest, Crystal Palace, who defensively are looking quite poor in the underlying stats department, and Leeds. Bournemouth as well, an away game. You couldn't really ask for a better 4 fixtures coming up. And as I mentioned, right now in this situation that Leicester are in, Brendan Rodgers in charge. We're not really seeing too much hope right now for Leicester. But in Maddison, what we are seeing is a talismanic figure right now in the team who's delivering week in, week out, as I mentioned. And the underlying stats, while they're not necessarily the greatest reading, I do anticipate with the fixtures coming up right now, we could see Maddison really come into a real hot streak. And looking at the predicted points right now, he is predicted to score 19.4 points over those 4 fixtures. Now that is actually the 4th highest predicted points of any player in any position at any price range. The usual suspects, Salah, Haaland and Kane, are those that are above him right now. So forget the 8 million bracket, forget about midfielders. Maddison in isolation is the 4th best player based on predicted points. And as I mentioned, it is going to come down about those fixtures coming up. So I think if you're right now set there with a wildcard, Maddison is an essential midfielder that you need to bring into your team and hold up until game week 12 when the fixtures slightly start to turn for the worse after that period. And if you're on the market for a midfielder around this price range, he will be my number 1 target above the likes of Wilfried Zaha. He is the man to go to. So let me know in the comments, guys, what your thoughts are on Maddison right now. For me, he is locked into my wildcard draft, and I'm really excited to have him over those next 4 game weeks. So let's touch on another player which is a little bit controversial right now in the FPL community. And that man is going to be Dominic Solanke. This guy has absolutely divided the FPL community for a majority of reasons. Main reason being is Bournemouth themselves in isolation have been the worst team for expected goals. Bournemouth right now, 3.35 expected goals in their fixtures so far this season is absolutely woeful. So for us to consider a forward like Dominic Solanke, it seems a bit mad really. So let's just cover off some of the cons about owning Dominic Solanke and why there are a lot of arguments about why we shouldn't even consider him as an option. Currently, 34th best forward for expected goals per game on 0.1. That's Dominic Solanke in isolation. So again, not pretty reading right now. And you can see it on screen here. Played 5 games, 1 goal, 0.52 expected goals. But as I mentioned, when we kind of break that down into expected goals per game. It works out about 0.1 per game. And 5 shots in the box, not the most pleasant reading right now for Dominic Solanke owners. 8 shots so far this season. Again, the shot volume isn't necessarily something that we're getting excited about with Dominic Solanke. And as I touched on, Bournemouth in themselves as a team aren't really clicking right now in terms of an attacking force. Now, why are we considering Dominic Solanke, and why am I sat here right now recommending him as a potential FPL transfer? Well, first and foremost, we need to consider the fixtures that Bournemouth have played so far this season. They've had some tricky games. Man City, Arsenal, Liverpool, Wolves and Newcastle make up the majority of the fixtures that they have played. And whether that's home or away, we can all agree here that those are very tricky fixtures. Wolves looking good on the underlying stats for expected goals conceded. So for an attacking asset against those, that was going to always be a tricky game on paper. And as they said, in terms of Maddison, players that we're considering right now need to have those fixtures coming up that we can really get excited about. And that is going to be the same for both Bournemouth and Solanke. Up next with their 4 fixtures, Brentford, Leicester, Fulham and Southampton, with 3 of those being at home, is the best run of fixtures over that period. It's worth mentioning that long-term, the fixtures are fantastic for Bournemouth as well. So Dominic Solanke is a player that you could just bring in and happily own throughout that period. Where he's going to return or not is the big question, of course. Now, a few other notable things about Dominic Solanke. First and foremost, being 5.7 million, he is basically an enabler for your squad. So I can't sit here right now and tell you that Dominic Solanke is going to score 5-6 goals over this 4-game week period. I absolutely categorically agree with you on that thought process there. But at 5.7 million, we need to remember that what combinations this provides us in our squads. For example, Dominic Solanke versus Ivan Toney has been a hotly discussed topic right now in the community. And with that 1.52 million saving, that could be the difference between you potentially having the likes of Trippier at Newcastle or having someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold at Liverpool. Now, I will leave that with you to decide which combination you prefer. But it's just to give you an idea that players like Dominic Solanke give you guaranteed game time on penalties and almost a talisman in their side. Although they aren't necessarily delivering in the attacking department, you know that you're getting first and foremost those solid minutes. And what I really do like is an enabler in those squads to afford other premium players in your team and bolster up the rest of your squad. And secondly, the important thing as well that a lot of managers need to consider is that blank game week in game week 12, where both Man City and Arsenal involved in that are blanking. So a lot of managers sat there right now might have Haaland, Cancelo, maybe a third Man City option, and also sat there with maybe an Arsenal defensive coverage and also Martinelli. Now, you're likely going to sit there and think, I don't want to sell Cancelo, I don't want to sell Haaland, and I don't want to sell Martinelli because of the value that I've built up in them. Therefore, this is where your squad is really going to come into its own. And in game week 12 at home to Southampton, I think that's a fantastic fixture when we are looking at game week 12 in isolation. And I really think Dominic Solanke could really come up trumps in that fixture. So again, we're looking at it a little bit more longer term and the value that he could offer to us in that fixture. And as I said, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Dominic Solanke is going to score bags of goals. But I think what you need to take away from this is, what could you do with your squad if you bring Dominic Solanke in and upgrade other areas in your team? I really do think it is worthwhile you creating a few FPL drafts if you're on your wildcard right now, just to see whether he does enable you to afford other players in your draft. So let me know. And a spoiler alert, he is currently in my current wildcard draft. But let me know in the comments, guys, what your thoughts are on Dominic Solanke. Can Bournemouth turn the curve in the attacking department? And Dominic Solanke in particular, can he get that run of form that we are all craving for? So let's touch on the last player here, and a player that a lot of managers haven't been discussing, and someone that we at Fantasy Football Fix think could be an excellent differential. And that man is going to be Liverpool's Luis Diaz. 8.2 million. He's had a really good start to the season in a Liverpool shirt, considering the real kind of unpredictability that we've seen in Liverpool so far this season. He has been one of the shining lights in that Liverpool team. 6 games played, 3 goals scored, and expected goals of 2.31. For a player that doesn't have any penalty involvement, those are really good underlying stats. for someone like Diaz there. And it's worth noting, of course, we did have that Bournemouth 9-0 fixture, which is always going to skew the underlying stats for these Liverpool assets just because it was such an anomaly. But still, that was a game that they played, and we do need to take into account everything that we are viewing there. Now, the big thing about Diaz and why we have him in this top transfers list is because, similar to Solanke, what his price range enables you to do with the rest of your team. Now, a lot of managers right now are building their wildcard drafts with Mo Salah as their Liverpool midfielder asset. And while I absolutely agree that Mo Salah is a brilliant FPL option, he is definitely worth his weight in gold when he is on form. With that 4.5 million that you could save, could that free up funds elsewhere to invest in the other departments of your team, similar to what Dominic Solanke does? So I'm just going to quickly touch on some comparisons here between both Luis Diaz and Mo Salah so far this season. Now, 2.31 expected goals for Luis Diaz. That is currently the fourth best expected goals for any midfielder under 8.5 million. And it's worth noting that it's the second best for non-pen expected goals. So when we take out the likes of Wilfried Zaha, for example, who are on penalties, and even Brighton's McAllister, Luis Diaz really comes into his own in that department. And it's worth noting as well, you can see the touches in opposition box, an impressive 43. He actually has the third best of any player at any price range, Mo Salah being at the top there at 55. So just to deep dive into a couple other underlying stats here, comparing Diaz and Mo Salah. Points per game, Mo Salah 6.3, Diaz 5.3. Expected goals, 2.54 for Salah, 2.31 for Diaz. And shots, 17 for Salah, 16 for Diaz. And goals, as I mentioned, 3 for Diaz and 2 for Mo Salah. So when we do look at them stats there, if I was to take away the names and I was just to show you the prices there, you'd absolutely agree that Luis Diaz is the value FPL pick. And I don't think necessarily we need to think that that is going to necessarily change over the coming game weeks. The fixtures coming up we know are difficult for Liverpool, but that Brighton game at home is proving to be an excellent differential for those that are wildcard in this game week, because a lot of managers that wildcard in game week 8 went without no Liverpool assets. So having a Liverpool attacker in that fixture is going to prove to be a bit of a differential in itself. Now, a few of the things that we need to consider with Diaz: rotation risk. As I mentioned, he has been one of the outstanding players at Liverpool so far, so I don't think necessarily we need to think that Diaz is just going to get dropped by Jurgen Klopp. I think Jurgen Klopp still sees him as the, not number one, but in his best front three. But with Diego Jota, with Darwin Núñez and Firmino back in this Liverpool team, they are going to be vying for positions in that front three. Now, if the assumption is that Mo Salah is locked in at the right wing and Diaz at the left, we have three players operating down the middle there. And we know from past seasons that Diego Jota is more than capable of operating on the left of that front three. So while I think Diaz is absolutely locked in that front three, it is worth mentioning that it is more of a heightened rotation risk due to his minutes because of the emergence of Diego Jota back in the team. And it's also worth noting as well, it's quite tough to own Luis Diaz if you also want to own Haaland and a premium midfielder in the likes of KDB, Salah or Son. So as I mentioned with Dominic Solanke, I really encourage you to build wildcard drafts to see where you can upgrade the rest of your team. I would encourage you maybe to see what is your structure right now in terms of FPL team draft. Do you want to have a structure of a premium midfielder and premium striker? If you do, and Luis Diaz, you might have to make sacrifices along the way and not have the likes of Maddison or Cancelo in defence. So that is worth noting there. But looking at his predicted points coming up over the next 4 game weeks, he's predicted to score 16.9 points, which is the 6th best of any player over that period. Again, offering fantastic FPL value. So what are my final thoughts on Luis Diaz here? I think if I was sat here right now building a wildcard team and you wanted a premium midfielder slot, that I think Mo Salah is the route to go down, and therefore I don't think necessarily doubling up on the Liverpool assets is the right strategy. However, if you are not necessarily in the camp of Mo Salah and you want to really spread your funds across the midfield, then I think Luis Diaz is an absolutely fantastic differential. As I mentioned, the underlying stats are pretty much there or thereabouts with Mo Salah, and being 4.5 million cheaper With those funds, you can upgrade your squad elsewhere. You could bring in an additional premium striker, or you could bring back big at the back and have the likes of Trent, Cancelo, all these big scoring defenders in your team. So it's all about the structure that you want to go for. But let me know in the comments, guys, what your thoughts are right now. I really do think Luis Diaz is flying under the radar and somebody who could be a fantastic differential pick in your teams. So guys, that's going to wrap up the top transfers ahead of game week 9. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. And as always, if you haven't already, make sure you do subscribe to the channel. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure you do drop a like. And we will see you in the next video. Take care. Cheers.